season, AFC Bournemouth are embarking on their 8th Premier League campaign. Indeed, almost to this day 10 years ago, Cherries were kicking off the Championship campaign that got them promoted for the very first time. Were you there at Huddersfield? If you were, thumbs up this video. We were unfashionable. The side was a self-titled team full of misfits, and the backstory to our club meant that promotion was always deemed impossible, a million miles away, never gonna happen. And look, we know how the 90s and noughties went. Changes of ownership, selling the stadium, relegations, points deductions, near liquidation administrations, the lot. The top flight, it was just never in Bournemouth's DNA. For this reason, reaching the promised land, well, it came as a shock to many and a surprise to even us. We had 56,000 followers on Twitter. Now we've got over 700,000. Our stadium wasn't equipped, and we had players on the books that were plying their trade with us in League Two. Were we ready? Well, we certainly had to learn quickly, because not only that, aside from your James Hayter hat-trick moments and your chairman on the pitch moments, we were now also dealing with more than just domestic media, as our exposure was global. But Bournemouth's exposure, well, it felt a different level, and there's probably a reason for that. And that reason is here to chat to us today. We're delighted to be joined by one of the men in blazers himself, Roger Bennett. Roger, how are you?
It's a joy to be with you, and big love to every single Bournemouth supporter around the world. What a club.
Look, there are some people who are bound to be following you on YouTube, but for those who don't, and for people here in the UK that might not be aware of what you do, can you maybe just give them a brief insight?
Lord, I'm the founder of the Men in Blazers Media Network. It's the biggest platform for football in the United States. The Premier League, I moved to America in 1994 ahead of the last World Cup, which was meant to put football, soccer, as they call it here, over the top in this nation. It was still the biggest attended World Cup of all time, but it didn't turn America into, I guess, a normal football-loving nation. But it did slowly and steadily start this audience building. The World Cup's coming back here in 2026. And around 2014, NBC started to broadcast the Premier League. And we just noticed a explosive growth in the number of young Americans under the age of 30 who were following men's, women's, club, international, domestic and global football. We started in 2010 during the World Cup when podcasts just began, a regular conversation about football, and it's exploded now to really a full-throated network. We got 18 different hosts covering the men's game, the women's game. Tyler Adams is amongst the great Bournemouth player of the future. We hope very soon he'll be back. But we cover every aspect of the global game with this now enormous American audience, all of whom are watching the Premier League with fresh eyes, choosing clubs without geographical constraint. Hence, why so many of them have chosen Bournemouth for the journey of wonder that lies ahead. But that's kind of what we do, and it's been the joy of a lifetime to see the sport I love, football. I grew up in Liverpool, to see the sport I love just flourishing in the nation that I've moved to now.
I just wonder whether that Diana Ross penalty was a sliding doors moment. I mean, had she scored it, maybe it would have got more popular more quickly. But alas, she put it wide. What a pen!
God, it was genuinely one of the more agonising misses not scored by an Everton footballer of my lifetime. Come on, Diana Ross. You got to finish. By the way, Everton probably will end up signing Diana Ross to be the number 9 that will fill Matt Lewin's shoes for the season ahead. So I need to be very careful in my measured words. But we're here to talk about beautiful, beautiful Bournemouth.
Yeah, of course. And look, I do want to reference your recent Men in Blazers video about American soccer fans, because I find that so interesting. The stats behind it are unbelievable. But look, I mean, there's real hunger for the game over there. Every game is televised. And back in 2015, you presented a documentary on NBC called Together Anything is Possible, charting AFC Bournemouth's fall and then rise. It was 45 minutes long, but an action-packed 45 minutes. And it started with scenes from the beach, sleepy seaside town, the pier. It's not quite Venice Beach, but it's close. And then you come in to start a story about a club that defied the odds and got promoted to the top flight. What do you remember about recording it?
Look, because the Premier League clubs want the American audience from the very beginning of the Men in Blazers media network, we have had access to so many of the players, so many of the managers who want to speak to the American audience. So from a very early day, we started, and also, by the way, the reverse commute. We have Hollywood entertainment sporting figures over here who want to connect to football. So the most regular guests for the Men in Blazers media network are like Matthew McConaughey, Will Ferrell, John Oliver, Eva Longoria, Joel Embiid, all human beings who love talking about football. Um, Pep Guardiola comes on once a year. Jurgen Klopp came on once a year. But we just filmed with Enzo Maresca. He did his first interview, the Chelsea manager, on our network. And so we'd spent a lot of time in those early days coming over to England, knowing that the first ever letter we ever got when I started the show was from an American fan who wrote to us and said, "So, what part of London is Newcastle in?" And we could have, there is something intrinsically funny about that, but I understood completely, ultimately from that beautiful letter, what American fans wanted when they approached the Premier League, which is they're approaching it with fresh eyes, with incredible passion, with a real hunger to learn, but also trying to understand the Star Wars cantina of clubs and leagues and tournaments. And many have never been to England, so why would they know where Newcastle is? And so ultimately, our North Star has been trying to explain, the backstories to these teams. What is Liverpool as a city, a great port city, once one of the greatest in the world, fallen in hard times in the 80s, growing up there. Music and football was how we announced ourselves to the world when the economic and political power of the city was ripped from it. And trying to backstory, what is Newcastle? What does Newcastle stand for? What does it mean? And so ultimately, we were able to come over and tell a lot of these stories very, very early on. It's been the honor of my lifetime to be able to backstory and to engage these reactions. So the Bournemouth one was one of many that we've been able to do when these teams came up and were promoted. The American audience, look, there's the American audience who followed football avidly for decades and lived here and know everything about football and didn't need to know what a Bournemouth is. But we started this series with NBC, who've done an incredible job telling the story of the Premier League over in the United States with Rebecca Lowe, who is just like the mother of dragons, just an incredible human being, storytelling week to week, game to game. In a brilliant fashion. But when these teams were promoted, they were like new characters that many of the audience who were new to the game, they didn't know what a Huddersfield was. They didn't know, even what a Fulham was when Fulham first came up. Yeah. And so we came over and told the backstory. And so I came over to Bournemouth. I had not been to the town of Bournemouth since I was a kid. We went on holiday there once. I didn't know a huge amount. We do a lot of pre-production. I immerse myself in the story. So what do I remember is it was honestly the most riveting, most nourishing, most joyful, one of the richest emotional pieces of storytelling that we've done. And I still have such a soft spot for the town, for the team, for the stadium, for the human beings that ultimately football is at its best when it transcends football. When it touches something which is emotionally profound or emotionally revealing, and that's what I remember from the 3 days that we had in Bournemouth, speaking to everyone at the club, and I can be more specific in a moment. But it was just joy, and that's when we're living in a world of chaos. It's quite a frightening time over here. I know it's crazy in England at the moment, and football giving you joy, even fleeting joy, is probably its greatest gift. And that's what I remember about the Bournemouth experience.
Yeah, I mean, within the piece, you had interviews where you spoke to a number of people. You heard all about the bailiffs, the people that wanted to liquidate the club. You then spoke to Chairman Jeff Mostyn, who broke down in front of you when referring to the family conversations he had with regards to putting his own money in the club. It was emotion at its peak, really. At this point, I thought you did really well in giving them the space to tear up in front of you. But did you almost get the pound signs in the eyes moment, thinking this is going to be the story that people back home are going to love?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not that emotionally manipulative in these interviews that when it happens, I'm like fist pumping as if I've just scored a goal. So I mean, doing interviews is a strange and remarkable experience where. I mean, it starts in pre-production. That's where you know you've really got a story. Doing the work before you even arrive, trying to find that human story, working with the researchers and working on that script. And to be candid, like if I did fist pump, it was when I was in my own office before I'd even left the United States when I did touch upon this really, I mean, it's an incredible journey. Ultimately, the football teams we choose, they're all just journeys. I'm an Everton fan, so mine is actually a journey into Dante's Circle of Hell. And many Americans have chosen to march on that journey. Many of the deeply masochistic trauma lovers, rubberneckers amongst us have plunged there. And the Bournemouth story, that's ultimately, to be candid, Sam, when I knew I was about to be privy and humbled and honoured to be doing something very special was when I read the story, learned the story, understood the depths, the emotional depths, understood the slim chances, understood the blink of oblivion. Was it Hemingway who said the greatest feeling in life is to be shot at without result, and that's the most thrilling emotion, and that's ultimately the Bournemouth story. And so when you realise that, and then realise just the escalation as a result. I mean, that's the magical thing, and since I shot the film for Bournemouth to cement their status and their role experience, and to build around it. I will say, I obviously have to cover a lot of football. I watch a ton of football. Still to this day, uh, given the choice, tuning into a Bournemouth game is a absolute delight and a pleasure, and something I try and sample as much as possible. And it thrills me that there's so many bloody Americans who made Bournemouth their team of choice.
I'm
Despite
sh-
me, despite me, despite me
well,
telling the story.
or maybe because of you. I mean, look, I'm sure the underdog story had its effect, but we were over in the US covering our recent tour, and no word of a lie, nearly every fan that we spoke to about how they started supporting the Cherries, they mentioned your name, and they are fans that really know their stuff. They started supporting in 2015. They watched your story. They did their own research. They watched loads of stuff on YouTube. They followed ever since. Do you quite realize the impact that you've had with producing this documentary? Because it is unbelievably massive.
I love you, and you're very generous. I'm American now, but the litany of Englishness for me is a heavy dose of self-loathing. So I won't have nice things said about me, particularly not in my presence. So what I'll say is, look, there's always been a fan base here, passionate about their football, knowledgeable about their football. But once the Premier League started to be broadcast on NBC, that audience has utterly surged. So when I think about it, you're very generous to connect me to the power of the Bournemouth story and the meaning that Bournemouth have given so many fans across America. That thrills me and gives me incredible joy. But the reality is, it's about timing. And the Premier League did start to be broadcast seriously here in 2014, made the film in 2015. I think it's really about timing and a testament to the power of the Bournemouth story, the Bournemouth fan base. And you tell a great story, and it is unforgettable. In America, we just did a study of our American fan base. It's available on the Men in Blazers website if you want to download and read it. I think it's pretty interesting. It's
Mm.
called From Sea to Shiny FC, and we studied 9,000 American fans to understand how their fandom is similar to European fandom and how it's different. And it's wonderful. It's deep. It's truly madly deeply. Like there are Americans who hated football 8 years ago and now have the Bournemouth logo tattooed on their forearm. They're like all in. But there was amazing percentages. I think
Mm.
43% support three or more teams, which is
Yes.
crazy and fascinating. Here who do you support? You support an NBA team, an NFL team, a baseball team. So multiple teams is the norm here. And when we do live shows across America, and we'll ask, who do you support? The fans will often say, Bournemouth is my Premier League team. In Germany, I support Dortmund. If Christian Pulisic plays at AC Milan, so I support them too. And the North Carolina Courage are my women's team. And so they're choosing with fresh eyes, and they are choosing. They didn't grow up in Manchester, so they don't have to just support City or United. They didn't grow up um, in Plymouth, and so support the local team. They get to choose without geographical constraint, and they don't have that multi-generational, most of them, DNA. I'm an Everton
Mm.
fan because my grandfather was an Everton fan. My dad was an Everton fan, and so this trauma was passed generation to generation. They often do not have that, and so they are choosing with fresh eyes. And I think it's at Bournemouth is just a riveting. They don't want to, support the juggernaut. They didn't want to,
Mm.
come in and just be bandwagon jumpers. So there is a very discerning moment, and a lot of them, by the way, have supported Arsenal. A lot of them have gone in for the heritage clubs,
Yeah.
aspirational nearlies. Liverpool, Arsenal, massive. But Bournemouth, in that moment, 2015, warm, underdogs. But one of the joys of the film for me, I mean, Jeff Mostyn obviously tearing
Mm.
up. Eddie Howe, different Eddie Howe.
Mm.
And I don't know how you guys feel about Eddie. The new Eddie, the heel Eddie, the
Love
heel
him.
turn Eddie. I mean, what a man, what a human being, well, he started getting upset in the interview, showing me his dead dog tattoo that he had on his arm. I
Yeah.
mean, what a gorgeous human being, and what a thoughtful human being, what an empathetic human being. Tyrone Mings had just signed,
Mm.
and I know it didn't work out for him at Bournemouth, but my God, what a human being! Now,
Yeah.
that
Great
interview,
guy.
I've interviewed Tyrone a bunch, but that interview at Bournemouth, when he'd been plucked like the last starfighter, as a very late bloomer, just doing incredible work for the world outside of himself, doing a lot of work for homeless charities in that moment. All of it was like everybody I spoke to was just like remarkable humanly and footballingly, and it all just clicked together.
Well, yeah, I mean the story sold itself, I'm certain, but you're the one that told it. So at some point you need to send an invoice into AFC Bournemouth because you're probably the man who sold 10,000 shirts, Roger, whether you like it or not. But look, storytelling in football, it's huge. And over the last 10 or more years, we've seen so many documentaries, the All or Nothings, the Sunderland Till I Dies, and now the Welcome to Wrexham's. And when we were playing them, it was unbelievable. They had a pop-up shop. It never had less than 30 people in line. Their global exposure is now huge. Do you think this is the way that football clubs are going to go now? Because what a great way to capitalise.
Um, when you say, "Is this the way clubs are going to go?" Can you just? I want to project. Do you mean speaking to a global audience?
Yeah, creating their own club documentaries like they have. I mean, it's nothing short of a phenomenon what Ryan and Rob have done for them, and they have truly put themselves on the map. We're trying to with the whole Michael B. Jordan thing, the Bill Foley thing, which hopefully will retain a few fans. I know in some of your videos you've said that if there isn't the pulling factor consistently, sometimes some of the American fans might flit off to other clubs, but we've got that. We've got Tyler Adams and stuff. But having a documentary alongside it, that certainly helps, keep them in a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a part of the study that we did, the Sea to Shining FC, which is probably hardest for English fans to tolerate. Even is
Mm.
that I think was it I think 12% of fans said they changed the team
Yeah.
they support in the last 5 years.
Mm.
Chelsea fans become frustrated. Ultimately, every Saturday in the morning, they're like, "What should I do with my next couple of hours?" And here they don't have that multi-generational DNA Everton. They don't have that. I grew up in Liverpool, Everton. So ultimately, with that couple of hours, if your team are starting to stink it up, lose their DNA, lose their identity, or if they're taken over by, an ownership group that you find unsavoury, emotionally, they do find themselves, you know what, I'm not going to watch Newcastle this weekend. I think I'll watch Arsenal, and emotionally reconnecting to another team. And so the team, as you're hinting, do need to keep selling themselves, do need to keep never taking that fandom for granted. Um, and the Bournemouth thing, we've had Bill Foley on the show. I think he's a fairly fascinating man, a very successful sports owner over here. His learning curve has been quite remarkable watching him do the Premier League thing. I think Iraola is a remarkable man. If I did a show, I'd love to do a show. His just how his brain works is genuinely intellectually very, very interesting, and there's a huge amount that I think the football world could learn from just him talking. I'd make that show in a heartbeat. The Wrexham thing is a phenomenon. We just did a live show with the Wrexham team in Vancouver. I'm going to go to the Wrexham game at the weekend, their first game in League One. We have a partnership with them where we tell their story to the American audience week on week. And there's no doubt that Americans are fascinated by Wrexham. But that's done now. You can't replicate the Wrexham thing. They are the world's greatest micro power. And so whatever the clubs do has to be done differently. You can't try and just repeat it. They were first movers. But I think to answer your first question, is that the future? I think there's no doubt the future is now. America is a 2026 coming the World Cup. It's a football loving nation. Like 94 when I moved here. And it was still like Space the Captain Kirk, the United States, the final frontier. That has completely changed. But there is a massive dislocation between the global fan base and the local fan base. I have friends who go and watch Bournemouth week in, week out, travel around the country watching the Cherries. Their wants and their needs are inherently different than Bournemouth trying to speak to a global audience. And there is that for every major modern club. The opportunity is enormous. There's no doubt it's the future, but decoding the tensions between the local fan base and the global fan base is, I think, every CEO's greatest dilemma in the next 10 years. And you see it when Newcastle's kickoff times are changed and they're stranded on the south coast late Sunday when there's no trains, just for the Asian audience, or on occasion the American audience. The talk of Premier League games being played in America is a deeply emotional one in ways for and against, in ways I understand both cases. But understanding the dislocation between those two fan bases is going to be the job of every single CEO over the next decade. It can be navigated harmoniously, beautifully, meaningfully, and all I can say is you've just witnessed, right, with the American audience, when it's done well, that the love affair between fan here and team can be deeply profound, and the memories made for the American fan as close to the one who goes to the Vitality every single week are one and the same. I mean, I will say thousands have gone on this Bournemouth journey. I think it's magical. I don't know how you're feeling ahead of this season. There's so much about the club, from the ownership level to the fan base, to the manager, and the just the alignment that I really, really admire and find truly fascinating. I will say, a great friend of mine over here, who grew up in Bournemouth and works in sports over here. He bizarrely watched Everton from Bournemouth when he was a team. If Scott Dixon, you're listening to this, you beautiful human being, it's you. Watched Everton in the FA Cup final, which we won against Watford, and decided, Bournemouth, whatever league you're in, I think you may have even been in the third tier. And he's like, obviously I'm a Bournemouth fan, but my big team are going to be Everton Football Club. And Scott, as a team, travelled all over Britain following Everton from Bournemouth, home and away, went every single bloody game. And I said one of the most hilarious and darkest moments for me was the season before last, when Bournemouth got promotion, and it looked until the very last day of the season Everton were going to be relegated. And Scott texted me, he said, never would teenage me have thought that Bournemouth would be in a higher league than Everton Football Club. But it looks like it's going to come to pass. It didn't come to pass. Um, but Godspeed. I think we played you on the
It
last day of
was,
the
yeah,
season, didn't we?
1-0,
Oh, my
1-0.
God. And you're trying a bit bloody hard too, you bastards. I remember that. I
Yeah.
remember that, and but Godspeed, Bournemouth's rise and Everton's decline really captured in that moment.
So, final question: will you be back to do some kind of documentary when we inevitably lift the FA Cup this season, Roger? I mean, it could happen,
Is that
right?
the hoop? Is that
Uh,
the hoop? Is that
we
where as you approach this
it'd be
season?
nice.
Is that where we are? You're like stability plus trophy, League Cup, FA
It,
Cup, Cherries, magic.
yeah, it'd be nice. It would be nice. Top 10 finish and maybe some silverware. But I think that would be the icing on the cake, and maybe bring a few more fans in. You never know, eh?
So I will say that modern Bournemouth. There's not a place. It always feels like it had its own ecosystem, its own weather system. It felt like a very different part of Britain. I would love to come back. I enjoyed every single second. I loved meeting the fans. I loved being in that tiny crucible of a stadium. We have a show. I'm about to tape the next episode tomorrow with Tyler Adams, called The Captain. He's the captain of the US team, in which we talk about, the world, life, both teams, Bournemouth and the US men's national team. I would love, so I'll tell you, if Bournemouth do go into a final, I will come and tape an episode live with Tyler
Perfect.
in Bournemouth, and we will raise a glass together. So,
Lovely stuff. Well, Roger, I certainly appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on.
thank you so much for having me, and to all the Bournemouth fans, I wish you ahead of this season just season of meaning, of wonder, of goals and memories. Please God, cup finals, and ultimately, let's not take a second watching football for granted, and up the cherries.
What a lovely guy. What a guy. What a guy. Do me a favour, right? Two things. Subscribe to the excellent Men in Blazers channel, but also check out that video that Roger was talking about, because it was really interesting to see. Not only that, click the link in the description, because you can watch the full 45-minute Together Anything Is Possible NBC documentary that is on AFC Bournemouth's official YouTube channel. So do check it out. It is an emotional low and then a high and then a low and then a high. Honestly, if you need to know everything there is about the club, then that is the place to be. But yeah, it's clear to see, and I said it in the interview, when chatting to so many people, I wasn't joking, everyone mentioned his name, and that's absolutely true. So our exposure, long may it continue, and having Tyler Adams, fit Tyler Adams, Michael B. Jordan and Bill Foley in the ranks, well, it's only going to bode well for us. But yeah, it was a pleasure to have Roger Bennett on. Look, there's going to be more chats along the way as we build up to the season opener against Nottingham Forest. That is not far away. Just over a week and a bit? Looking forward to that. If you want to get more AFC Bournemouth content, you know what to do. Hit the thumbs up. That really helps this video. But then subscribe as well. And once you do that, the bell will become active. And when you click that, you'll get pinged notifications for any time we go live. There are conversations to be had in the next few days, not least about Dom Solanke. I don't want him to go. But look, we need to talk about it. Up the chairs, and we'll see you in the next one.